You know what's funny? I was looking at our October 2019 conversation. It's like going to a time machine. And, one of the things that we were worried about, I think all of us were like, wow, Yang's not doing as well with women. And I think the reality was, at least based on Iowa and New Hampshire, he just wasn't doing well enough with all groups.
Mhm.
Were you surprised at the Iowa and New Hampshire outcomes, or did you sort of see from the inside that it was likely going to end up in that direction?
No, I certainly was surprised with Iowa's results. I mean, we were on the ground going so hard, 2 and 3 events a day, so much positive feedback from people. I mean, 90% of the feedback we got from people at events in Iowa were positive. They may not have walked out of there saying, I'm going to vote for him for president, but they almost always walked out of there with a more positive feeling towards him than they did when they came in, which is huge. Like, what? Every politician wants that, right? Like, that's not something that's easily accomplished. So let's hold on a second and just bravo for that, right? But based on what we saw with that, there was no reason for me to think that we were not going to do that well. I was shocked. Now, the other thing to remember about me in Iowa is that I was there for probably seven to 10 days working our 17-day bus tour. And then I got sick. And I don't know if you know this, Tom. Did you know this?
No, I didn't know that.
Oh, wow. Okay. So and now I wonder if I had COVID, but I got really, really bad fever, bad cough, super, super low energy. It was bad. Like, Hightow drove me from one part of Iowa to another one so I could go to the doctor and be with where the team was, so I wasn't left in the town before. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it was really, really bad. But I had a very high fever. I took a flu test and it came back negative. And the lady, and I even asked her about coronavirus then, the doctor that I saw, and she's like, well, blah, 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 we don't know a whole lot about that. And blah, blah, blah. And, I know that no like judgment towards her. I know we just didn't know a whole lot about it then, but I do think there's a very good chance that I actually had it. I'm going to take an antibodies test actually here in the next couple of weeks, but it knocked me out. It knocked me out for a good week. And then I flew to New Hampshire and I really wasn't well fully. And I kept pushing. And I was like, I can't. And so then, the campaign started to slow down and I was one of the first ones to go home. And it made a lot of sense in a lot of ways, because what can I do? I was sick. You know what I mean? And so, and then
you had to go home before the New Hampshire primary.
Yeah, I was in New Hampshire. Yes, but I wasn't there the night that we suspended. That's correct.
So let's talk about Iowa. So you're organizing this huge bus tour. The energy on the ground sounds super positive and fired up. We know on the internet he's like Elvis. So it's all seeming like we're going to have a huge upset, or at least come in maybe fourth or something like that. And, maybe high single digits. What was that like when the results, I guess, it's not like the results started rolling in because of the stupid counting problems.
Right. That was
what was it like kind of watching all this unfold?
Yeah, I mean, it was shocking. It was appalling to know that the systems that were supposed to be in place to make sure that this happened smoothly weren't. And I think none of us, I didn't expect that result at all. Like you're saying, all the evidence that we had, all the evidence that we could see was that, hey, we might freaking surprise people, you know? So such a tough blow. I mean, and as someone who had started out as a volunteer and a supporter, wow, it was so much harder for me because I like to think of myself as a realist and realistic, but I also know that when you're positive and you believe that things can happen, there's a lot higher chance that they can and they will. And so I was very positive all the way through. And I was like, from every indication I got from Andrew and the team, we weren't going anywhere for a long time, And so when this happened, it was like, holy shit, like that's not what we planned. I mean, I described it to somebody like this. It's so funny. I said it felt like we were on a roller coaster. We were going to the very tip top of the highest hill on the roller coaster. And we're like, yes, we're about to go down the hill. It's going to be awesome. And then we went down the hill and we crashed at the bottom. It's like, it's not even that we just went to the bottom and it just wasn't that cool. It was like we went and crashed in flames.
Yeah.
From an emotional standpoint, you could say that it felt like that.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly, I think a lot of us were really struck by that. And Heidi, thanks for the super chat. Heidi saying that it was a gut punch, and I think Heidi's going to have you on her show
cool.
in the future.
Hi, Heidi. Love you, girl. Yeah. She's awesome. I love her.
You're one of her favorites as well. Yeah. So after Iowa, were you thinking, okay, those Iowans, they're crazy, whatever. New Hampshire, more independent, a lot of libertarians, we'll show them we'll show them why Iowa was a blip. Or was the vibe like, oh man, we're screwed? Okay,
so remember I was sick. So I was like, I quarantined myself because I didn't want the team sick. Yeah. So I don't have a whole lot of perspective on how the team was feeling at this point. However, how I was feeling was this, what you just said, like, oh, well, whatever. It's Iowa. It's not the end of the world.
Right.
It's state one. We have multiple more states to go. New Hampshire's much more, it's a different voting style, different voting process. And many of the people there are, think differently than the people in Iowa. So I thought, okay. Plus we had a team that had been in New Hampshire for a while. They were awesome, Steve and Christina. And so in my head, I'm like, all right, let's get to New Hampshire and see what happens before we, throw in the towel or start to get too sad. I mean, again, little Miss Eternal Optimist over here. I was like, it's all good. We'll be all right.
So the thing with Iowa is, like you mentioned, you guys did a lot of events there, right?
Yes.
How many people showed up to each of these events? Would you get like dozens or hundreds or
hundreds?
Hundreds, yeah.
And depending on the event, we would have up to 1,000 certain ones.
So here's the weird thing. Like, you guys probably had like 20, 30 events at least in Iowa. And if you say like, all right, well, let's say we have
no, more like 90, I think is what I saw. Yeah. A lot, dude. A lot.
So, if you have like 1,000, we didn't have 1,000, but if you had like 100 people at each event, then that's 9,000 people if they were all unique and you didn't have duplicates. But presumably they had friends that they could influence. And then when you look at the actual, I'm gonna do a little quick chart sharing, some data. Got to do it.
We nerds now. Come on, I was waiting for it. Come on.
All right, here's the initial alignment, right, for the 2020 Iowa caucus, and not only, but 8,900 votes for Yang. So that suggests to me that there were probably people that went to the events that liked him, but at the end of the day decided to go with someone else. That would be my interpretation, that, like, of course we had all these events and of course people showed up and they were enthusiastic. but
Right.
maybe they were just so focused on trying to find. Maybe they didn't think he was like credible enough, or it would be too much of a long shot. They want to go with someone else, and that's why you might get the. Although Pete, they were willing to take a shot on Pete.
True.
37,000 of them at least.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? What do you think was the driver of that disconnect between the event support and then the caucus night support?
Mm-hmm. Well, the caucus itself is a very different voting process, which we all know. So, and we're not even really talking about that because we're talking about the initial alignment. So that's 8,000 folks.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, I would say that I think the disconnect is that people freaking love Yang. Like, I don't know anybody who doesn't really love Andrew Yang, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that they did. That as they saw him, they really liked him. But that didn't translate to, is this the guy that I think can be our president and needs to be our president? And I think the missing piece is just exposure, people knowing who he is for enough time. The fact that he hadn't had any experience in politics maybe was something that kept people from voting for him. I don't think it'll be something that will now, especially considering all the positive media that he's been getting and all the praise that he's gotten since spending. So I don't think that's going to be a hurdle again. And if we had to do 2024 right now, I think he could run and I think he could win without having that, that previous political experience being an issue. But I do think it was in this case.
So you raise a great point. If we had to run 2024 right now, I mean, we technically haven't picked a nominee yet for the Democratic Party. It is a very unusual time. And the candidate in the primaries with the most delegates, he's I think he's showing some weakness, whether it's justified or not. A lot of us dream of a day where I think it was Herzog did an April Fool's thing where he said Yang unsuspended. And part of me believed it for a half second. And I was like, oh, this is so awesome. Then I looked at the date and I was like, oh, mofo. But I mean, like Yang's message around UBI seems so relevant now that we've just flushed $3 trillion down the toilet through these random government programs.
Yep.
And I'm sure they will have some benefit. I don't think it would have nearly the same benefit of the freedom dividend for everybody for 18 months would have had, which is what we could have done, even without a VAT, because apparently we can spend $3 trillion now with no VAT. So, all the rules are out the window. So do you think like, you're an optimist. Do you think there's any door, like a crack open for seeing Yang either on the ticket or at the top of the ticket? Or do you think like, hey, let's just focus on winning in 2020 with the nominee, the likely nominee, and focusing on 2024 for the gang?
I know that it's Yang Gang's dream that Andrew would unsuspend, but I do not think that's even close to likely at all. I could be wrong, but I doubt that. Like, that would be the biggest shock to me if that happened. Now, would I love it if he did that and there was a path to victory and we could do it? But based on all the good that's happening now, of course I would. But I don't think that's happening. Do I hope that he would take, do I hope that he would be VP with Joe Biden? Of course I do. I just don't think that it's going to happen because I think he is set on a female.
Yeah.
I think he's set on a female. And it's sad. However, I do think that Joe Biden, there's a good chance that he would involve Andrew in his presidency. So that's a good thing.
Yep. I wouldn't be upset over that for sure. I do worry a little bit about whether we can beat Trump with Biden at the top of the ticket. Like, what's your I mean, all of us, I think this is probably a self-selection bias here, but like if you like Yang, it's not like, well, then obviously your next choice would be Joe Biden.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've said this previously. I think obviously we're in a position where we don't get our first choice anymore. Like this is not like the fun, woohoo, let's put the best guy that we like the most in office. But at the same time, like I want a new president in 2020 and starting 2021. So I'm willing to vote for whom that person is, whoever the nominee is. Now, whether he can beat Donald Trump or not, I have no idea. I really don't.